Hi, my name is Leander Sales, and I teach film editing at USC School of Cinematic Arts. Welcome to the One Story Up. This is the second Fireside Chat presented in partnership with the new streaming service, Topic and NYU Tisch. These Fireside Chats is all about mentoring and a conversation with the filmmakers. And to mention the mentoring part of it, Spike Lee from NYU was one of my mentors, along with another professor from NYU, Sam Pollard. So I want to thank them for mentoring someone like me and giving me the opportunity to mentor others, because that's what it's all about. It's all about mentoring. Usually we have Roger Ross Williams doing this, but he's prepping for his upcoming movie. He's in pre-production for Cassandra. And if you know Roger, you know he's an Academy Award and Emmy-winning director. So he's always here to drop dimes and give knowledge, but he's not here today. But we do have his pre-recorded message. So we'll let that roll. And then we'll get started with the Fireside Chat with Sanford and Callie. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Roger Ross Williams, and welcome to the second One Story Up Filmmaker Fireside Chat produced by Topic in partnership with NYU's Tisch School of the Arts. These events are based on my Topic original series, One Story Up, that showcases short films from emerging talent from underrepresented communities from around the globe each month. As a Black, gay, indie filmmaker who has always felt like an outsider in the industry, it's important to me to open doors for young, up-and-coming talent. Each event spotlights two amazingly gifted filmmakers featured in the series in conversation with each other. They'll chat about their experiences and insights on the craft and lessons they've learned along the way. Afterwards, you'll get a chance to ask them questions in an audience Q&A. Tonight, I'm excited to have Sanford Jenkins, whose film A Craftsman is a quiet and tender story about a grieving man who plans his own death and is met with unexpected results. It's featured in episode 6 of One Story Up. Next, we'll have Callie Lyons, the filmmaker and dancer behind Edge of Red, featured in episode 5 of One Story Up. Edge of Red is a nonlinear film that interweaves traditional Black folk songs and modern dance to explore what it means to grow up Black in the South. I'm really looking forward to hearing the conversations between these two amazing filmmakers because of the unique lens from which they view the world. Callie chose to use music and dance to explore the connection between herself, the land, the South, and her Blackness. Comparatively, Sanford chose to explore a taboo subject that many try to avoid or gloss over: death. We all have to deal with loss in some way and at some point, and in his film, he confronts that in an unexpected way. I'm excited to hear their ideas and their process, as well as where they find common ground. It is my pleasure to introduce Sanford Jenkins and Callie Lyons in conversation.
Sanford.
Where you at? Hey, what's up, Callie?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. How you feeling today?
I'm feeling good. You know, we're moving into warmer weather. The flowers are blooming. Feeling inspired by it. How about you?
Yeah. Probably you and a few solid folks that, I'd spent the last month in the woods. And so, that for me was extremely necessary during this time. And I feel rejuvenated right now in a lot of ways. So, I'm happy to be here with you. I think the last time we talked just casually, we were on the phone for, 2 or 3 hours or so. So I don't think we have that kind of time today. But, I went back and rewatched your film last night, Edge of Red, and I thought about your conversation with Roger. And, every time I watch your film now, it reminds me of the kind of, shared and also kind of varied experience that we had in the film program at USC. And, it makes me think about the different production modes that we went through in making in our films. My film was made more in a, studio process, if you will, and yours was much more independent. But I think the things that they share in common seem to be, kind of interests and sort of reconnecting with and exploring the land and community and form in a lot of ways, and so, I was thinking about how we should hold this space today, and it feels like we should begin in a conversation about film form. What do you think? And so that makes me want to ask you, like, what are you drawing from film today, as a artistic or kind of spiritual practice for you? Why are you doing this?
Thank you for opening it up in that way. Well, for everyone, I worked on your film as a PA. That was my first semester at USC, and so that was how I got introduced to you. And that was my first, I would say, bigger USC set. Everything prior to that were, your introductory classes, where it was you and a few partners from your class working on something. And so it was amazing to be able to witness a bunch of students coming together, working on this project. And I didn't know you very well at that time, but I just sensed this acute focus from you, this sense of detail, and very present within yourself. And I thought that was an amazing quality to witness from you, because oftentimes when we step into film school or any art program, I think there is this persona that is often put on who we think we're supposed to be in whatever medium you're working in. And I think for filmmaking, oftentimes we come in believing that we need to put on a certain performance. And what I felt from you was this sense of genuine curiosity for the craft, and you showed up in your body in that way. And I was so impressed by you. And when I saw the final film, the final edit, I was so impressed by a lot of decisions you made, and that I just heard through the grapevine that I felt that there may have been pressures for you to make different choices, for instance, with the choice to not use music. And I remember thinking, oh, that's an option. You can choose to deduct certain things that we naturally assume would just be automatically implemented, right? Because we're so used to seeing that or experiencing music, right? There's several other things, like the format in which you chose to screen it. And I had a similar experience in how I chose to format just the visual component. And so I just want to start off saying that. And so currently where I am with filmmaking, I've gone through a long process of excavating for myself what it is I am wanting to say in this practice. What signature do I want to imbue in this form, in this space, in the structure of filmmaking as a whole? And my experience making Edge of Red, I believe, was the propeller for that, because I made Edge of Red coming out of a lot of institutionalized, formulaic ways in making a film, which at the time I had judgments around, but in this space now, I've released a lot of those judgments, and I honor the fact that that works for a lot of people. However, it did not work for me, and so I felt a lot of resistance towards it. But now I'm in this space where there are certain elements from that I think are important for the craft. However, I believe there's always something new to discover, always something new to extract from yourself. And so Edge of Red was a very important process for me to understand that. And I know a big lesson I took away from that is the importance of having a minimal amount of people on set, yet having the right support to make sure things flow in a fashion that is efficient, yet we're not rushing, right? So that's something that's been on my mind a lot, that just the nature of production that is holistic and doesn't feel like you are burning people out, burning out your cast, putting a certain pressure on people, or even how you show up to the community or the environment in which you're shooting in. Am I exploiting people? How am I bringing people in from the environment I'm in? So all of those questions come up for me. So filmmaking for me is deeply a socio-political, economic venture. You can't negate all of the factors of the things happening in the community and the people around you and the time and place that we exist with all of the factors that are happening in the world. And so for me, when I go into anything, even if I'm just filming something in someone's house and that's it, there are factors, whether we are aware of it or not, whether we can perceive it or see it, it's all in conversation. And I think it's really important for all people, whether you're a filmmaker, a poet, a lawyer, I don't care who you are, that everything you do is being informed by something, and just to have deep awareness of that is important. So that's where I am in my process now, and how that then informs the work I make. So which then leads me into something that I've been thinking a lot about, and particularly today it came up for me, this idea of authenticity. And that's something we hear thrown around in the cultural zeitgeist. And I think at times it could get a little flattened because of that. You know, a lot of buzzwords or buzz terms that get thrown out into the world, I think often get flattened just by the nature of like how society runs and takes things. So with all of that, I'm curious from your end, what does creating from a place of authenticity look like for you in relation to oftentimes pressures, even from people who want authenticity? There's still this underlying pressure in wanting a certain type of thing that could be cloaked under authenticity. And so I'm wondering for you how you navigate creating in that complexity.
That's I'm gonna kind of take a roundabout way of getting there, because I also do want to follow up on what you said about, you know, the social and political and economic you know, situations we find ourselves in as filmmakers. You know, at least one of my former professors, Priya Jaikumar at USC, was asked a question about, you know, why speaks to her. And, you know, she studied literature in undergrad, but the difference was that you could primarily just do that in silos. You know, you could write and share however you wanted and deal and not really have to think too much about the sort of political and economic environment that writing is taking place in. You can just do the thing. I think what happens to filmmakers, especially filmmakers that, like in your case, going back home, trying to make a film with people who know you in some way, you know, or may not know you at all, you know, and wonder why you're here. You know, there's a different kind of engagement that you have with the form that sometimes flows through, you know, how you make the things, and sometimes, they may not. I think when I was at SC, and you're speaking, you know, about Craftsman, you know, that film came out of a very sort of studio-like process. The school funded the film. You know, we had an advisory board that oversaw the film. I mean, it was essentially everything that you would do in industry in academia, you know, at the school that is so on and so forth, right? We could do essentially whatever we wanted, but even within that, there were certain kinds of expectations, right? that people had for why you were really there, why you were chosen, so to speak, to be in that position. And I think for me, it always came back to kind of intuition, sort of mixed with a general understanding of how the business works, right? Like you just can't forget that on some level. I mean, you don't have to prioritize it, but you have to the reality of the situation I found myself in was that it's show business, right? And you have to be mindful of the rooms that you're walking into, even if you're trying to deconstruct them, right? If you want to get anyone sort of, not necessarily attention, you can get attention in a lot of ways, but if you want to get anyone on your side of trying to do things, right, you have to understand on some level what it is that's driving them. And I think for me, the whole project or experiment to film school was really that kind of understanding. You and I actually have similar stories and not going to Tisch. I lived in New York for about 3.5 years before I, started film school. And one of the reasons I actually came to SC was, someone that I worked with in film distribution at that time told me, that you should go to LA, where things are happening and really understand what it is that drives you to participate in this form, and once you, have a better handle on that, you can stay or you can go wherever you need to go to do the things you need to do and bring the people with you. But you have to know. And I think, and coming back to this question of authenticity, I think, we're constantly learning, right? And we're constantly sort of rerouting. It's all really about the approach that we take sort of at any given time for, for the things that we do in life. And where I was when I started the program and where I was when I ended were very different places when it comes to, my idea of sort of how I approach filmmaking. I thought about it, I began to think about it in a lot more communal sense, and the people being the people that that you're embarking on this, this project with being, immensely important, who those collaborators are. And it's an ongoing thing, like I'm in the midst of new projects, right? Short form and long form things, features. And, they're all slightly different. But I think the thing that I always have, that sort of, that North Star, if you will, is my intuition with things. Like I have to be in tune with that. And I have to recognize, what I'm walking into in some sense, and then make sure that I'm making the best gut choice, sort of spiritual choice that I can, to not compromise, but to just recognize, what's, what the consequences are of any of these things, and be cool with that, and be cool with that. And, that makes me, in some sense, want to kind of follow up what you were talking about and going back to, to George with Edge of Red and how important, the people that you brought with you were. I mean, there are a lot of familiar faces working on your film, right? Marawi was there, Mark was there, and the three of you also went on to work on, on Marawi's debut feature, Residue, and I was kind of around for that film, really just watching cuts at the end. But I think it's interesting that we kind of somehow began to create this sort of orbit of people, that we feel good with, and I want to know from, for you, like, what is it that drew you to the people that you brought with you to Georgia, to this place that's so intimate to you? And I also wonder how the subjects in your film sort of informed, the relationships with your crew and your writing process, and how everybody kind of work through this process together to make a film. What was that really like for you?
Yeah, so I'm very much someone that has to tune in with people on a human level to work with them beyond skill, technique, or artistic prowess. Like all of those things are, of course, incredibly important. And vital components in making those decisions and in bringing people along on the journey. And because Edge of Red was personal, and I knew it was going to involve people in my family, I knew it would involve people from my hometown, that I wasn't just going to choose crew members for the sake of having crew members. And so for me, particularly with Mark and Marawi, because we had worked together previously with Residue, I understood their approach to filmmaking. And I know that all of us have very similar philosophical perspectives on not only filmmaking, but the world. And so I think there was a natural flow to the way that we both communicated, the rhythm in which we moved on set, that was already ingrained. And so for me, that felt pretty easy to make that decision. And I think there was just this ability to just be myself and not have to explain who I am. Because prior in USC, for instance, I love everyone I've worked with in all of the films I made. I loved everyone I worked with. It was great. However, there were times where I felt I had to over explain myself. And I didn't quite enjoy that. However, I know that is going to be a part of this journey. And I know that is not the last time I'm going to experience that. That's just what it is, right? And so for me, I felt it incredibly important to just be able to work with people that I knew I would just be like, yo, this is what it is. I can talk the way I want to talk. Same with casting. Several of the people casted were family members. In the barbershop scene, I had a few cousins in that scene. My dad was in the scene in the bedroom with the Bible. So it was just easy for me to be able to be like, yo, this is what it is, and not have to, again, put on a performance to be someone for whether I'm trying to impress people or not. Like, it wasn't about that. So that was very important for me at that time. So I know we're very limited on time. I just want to make sure that we are incorporating questions that may be asked at this time, or if there are no questions, we can keep rolling.
Yeah, I have a question, just kind of this is a thing that I think is appropriate to ask you, just given how personal your film was, especially. But I mean, even in the process I find myself in right now, I'm beginning to sort of engage people I've known for a very long time as subjects for a film. And you're right in that it's a lot different than the more obvious studio model, where you write a thing, that thing is broken down, it's casted, it's budgeted, right? The costumes are made, and then you make it wherever it's the most economically feasible to do it, and it makes me think about just storytelling from the root, in a sense. And the question I think I'm getting to is, like, who's the best storyteller in your family or your community? Like, what is it that you draw from those folks, just naturally?
And you always got to go to the elders.
Yeah.
The elders. And I think about my grandmother, who grew up in Athens, Georgia, and her parents were sharecroppers. So it's, to me, just looking at the timeline of our history to be where we are now, and to her still share those stories of being a child on a sharecropping farm. Some couldn't go to school. Her and her sister couldn't go to school because they had to work. And then they went to school, and then they finally were able to go to school. And just stuff like that is wild to me, that someone is still alive to share that. Really, it puts a dent in things for me in a particular type of way. And so the elders, I feel, are always amazing people to be in dialogue with, and just allowing them to speak freely. The things that they share is just remarkable, especially when they are older and they feel that there's nothing to lose. Essentially, I might as well tell you these things that I may have not shared with anyone, or I've kept close for whatever reason. So I think there's something particularly sensitive and vulnerable at that age in which people feel completely free and uninhibited to just share in such a way that truly it puts things in perspective, right? And so that's really important for me to just, and my grandmother, she is my last living grandmother, and so that also is a quite pivotal thing for me as well, to be really present for when she is sharing about things in her life. But what about you? What's your relationship like to that?
Yeah, it's you know, I think I actually asked my mom this question yesterday out of curiosity to see who she thought, you know, from our family were, you know, were the best storytellers. And she mentioned a few people that, you know, that I've been speaking to that makes sense. But I began to also think about, you know, Black sociality a little more broadly, right? Like Philly, where I grew up, has this, you know, the you talked about language and intonation a little bit, and rhythm, and sort of how that, you know, how that matters to not only, you know, your approach to filmmaking, but just in the ways in which you know, engage with people daily. And I think the way that I was sort of nurtured as a storyteller in Philly is interesting, because there's a certain kind of humor and a certain kind of reference that, you know, and when I say reference, I mean, you know, Philly is a, you know, it's a very big, you know, soul music town, right? And people there also watch a lot of, you know, popular movies, and there's this just magical ability to sort of bring in, you know, snippets from films and from music, and in this way that gives every kind of story sort of a new meaning. You know, like you'll talk to a friend just casually about whatever, right? And then all of a sudden they'll break out in mid-sentence into a song that has perfect that makes absolute perfect sense to you why they would be doing it in that conversation, you know. And it's one of those things that sort of, it's like, it's unimitable, I guess that's the word. It's like, you know, not necessarily if you know, you know, but it's a thing that like we have sort of nurtured as a community, ways of sort of speaking to each other, right? And I think it's interesting when I think about film, you know, like the first hour of Crooklyn, for example, gives me that same kind of feeling of just like life being lived in a way that I naturally understand. You know, you know, it doesn't need a plot, right? The plot is the life itself. I think, you know, Cooley High is like that, kind of Killer Sheep's kind of like that, you know, where you understand it almost on a very deeply spiritual level. And you know, I've been thinking about that when it comes to filmmaking these days. You know, how do we incorporate that kind of way of language, you know, way of seeing and feeling into the work that we do, you know, in this form. And so, but man, I mean, I could just sit and listen to my old heads talk all day. You know, like I don't have to speak when I go home a lot of times, because there's so much there's so much that I need to ingest, you know, from the folks who are, you know, who are there. And then things that I also have to share too. But you know, it's just, and I think that's one of the things that really makes home feel like home in a lot of ways too. You know, it's the feeling more than anything, just this feeling that we have this shared experience. You know, and it's the kind of thing that can, you know, never really be taken away. You know.
Yeah, you said something that just made me think. For me, if I'm able to engage with a film and close my eyes and still be engaged, that to me is so powerful. And so there are certain films in which I could just be watching it casually because, you know, whether I'm thinking about it, it's on the TV, whatever. And if I have to step away and get something, I'm still immersed in the sound, the tone, the quality of the way people are talking, and I'm still in it. I'm not lost, even though my sight of what I'm seeing has been taken away. I can still engage with it. And I think that is powerful, you
Yeah.
know? So I think it's so important when you are in the creation process of your work, or in editing specifically, is to be able to turn away and just absorb what it is you're hearing, because there's so much in that. And so, like, being in Philly, because I think I've been to Philly several times, I think Philly has the most fascinating energy. And also, having lived in New York, there's something about
Hmm.
Philly that is just so different that I think New York has. I think it's naturally established in New York just by the nature of of it being a dense city and having so many different people from different parts of the world there. But there's something about Philly that just has this essence, and it's hard to make sense of why that is, where that came from. I feel a place like Chicago touches on it a little bit, but
Hmm.
I love hearing you speak about your hometown, because there's something there, and I'm sure you could just walk through the streets of Philly or in communities you're
Yeah.
familiar with and close your eyes, and you're just like, man,
Hmm.
you feel it, right? And so I think that's what is so beautiful about filmmaking, is that there are all these different immersive things happening at one time. And I'm just so curious whenever I'm watching something, curious to know if people are making these decisions consciously, or if it's pure happenstance, and you're
Hmm.
always discovering something through that. And so that for me then informs how I move through the world. It's just really pay attention to what people are saying, but then there's also
Yeah.
the inverse, really opening up your eyes and your senses to what it is that you're viewing. I think that too is something that is important. So maybe turning the sound off and just watching, and you're observing and discovering new things because of that. So yeah, that really opened that up for me. You speaking about that, it's amazing.
Yeah. I don't think we have any questions right now that I can see.
No, I don't see any.
Um,
We
so
can.
maybe we can keep talking. I want to follow up on this point here, because I have a question for you about growing up in the South, and then maybe we can talk about the films a little bit. But when you mentioned, Chicago, for example, I often wonder, because I knew how I grew up in Philly is, really just concrete and asphalt, right? And the kids there kind of had to figure out ways to keep themselves busy, because nature was in a sense so far away. And these are industrial towns, right?
Mhm.
And so our sort of sociality is probably a little different than people who really live on the land. And one of the things I found really beautiful about being in California is that you can go hiking here. Like, you can just be outside, right? Like outside without humans, and it feels different. Like, the whole experience feels completely different, and it kind of opens up something in me that I wonder, if a lot more, kids from, say, northern and in some sort of western towns, if they had that experience, if that would sort of change the way in which they socialize, and so I wonder what it was like for you growing up so close to the land in the South, and sort of what that did for the ways in which you socialize as children. Because I think that sort of childhood experience really affects the way in which we begin to become storytellers, and develop the things that we do.
Mm.
And that's pretty evident also with Edge of Red, and all of the children in your film. Like, one of my favorite scenes is the one where Lee's playing in the water with her brother, and she's talking about the bad dreams that she has, like, day and night. And uh and then the brother, she kind of looks up and her brother's not there, and you're there, sort of walking into the water. And it makes me think a lot about memory and childhood. And so I wonder, like, what was that like for you, your social experience?
Mm. Hmm. Well, when you're a kid, when you're in it, you aren't aware that there are possibilities beyond that, or
Hmm.
experiences outside of your own experience. There's a level of understanding from an intellectual point of view, knowing, oh, if I'm a New York kid. I'm in the streets, concrete. However, that wasn't something that I was drawing comparisons to at that time. I was simply in it. But as I got older and moved away from school and started interacting with people from all over the world, that's when it hit me. And I was able to understand that there are people who have direct connection to land. There are people who were living they're living in the middle of Harlem, or living in LA or the Bay. And it really brought a lot of awareness to the fact that we are having such different childhood experiences, yet similar. There are similarities that are intertwining, especially as Black people. All of our ancestors came from the South. If we are American, if our families' generations go back and we're still here in America. So there are those cross connections, like friends from LA talk about their grandparents. I'm thinking, are our grandparents the same grandparents? Like what? Like they did, my grandparents did the same thing. So there is that cross collaboration happening. But when I think about my childhood, I think about climbing trees and just hanging out in trees, you know? I think about summers going to my grandparents' house in South Carolina outside of Charleston, and very country. Like you're thinking of what country, like that is it, just country, running around.
You know, I used to joke about the fact that I used to joke about you know, when you know, like northern kids always get hit to the south with their relatives for the summer. And I used to go spend time with family I had in around Virginia Beach, and they went to church every day. And and it was so hot every day. And people were just outside socializing like it was nothing. And I just wanted to be in the house with an air conditioner, you know, just because I was so used to just being in sort of more confined spaces, you know.
Wow.
But that was there every day, you know, and it was the whole way of life for me just felt different, you know. And you don't really know how to process that as a kid, but I think now I went to undergrad in Atlanta, and so I had a better sense of sort of what I was feeling when I met people who grew up in Georgia or in the South. But yeah, that always fascinates me. And like you talk about climbing in trees, I remember streets that I lived on in Philly that didn't have trees, you know. So we were all on the porch, right? And so, or we were in the street, you know, because back then not as many people had cars. So so we could play in the street, you know, we could play with the fire hydrants and all of that. You know, it was a completely different way of sort of, you know, coming of age. I think that's really that's really fascinating to me. It looks like we have a question here. The first one is from Jacob, who asks, "What are some movies and TV shows that you constantly come back to for inspiration?" You want to take that?
You know, there's nothing in specific that I'm thinking of, but I'm thinking of the 90s a lot, the quality of movies at that time. I think there was, and not only that, something so specific as even the way makeup is done in the 90s. I'm really attracted to that. And I feel like the way color was used at that time was really significant. And just the saturation of the 90s just feel really warm, and you feel connected to it in a certain type of way. Sometimes I think in our current modern era, with everything being so crisp and high def, I particularly get lost sometimes when things are a little too perfect, right? And especially if I'm watching something on large TV, I can get lost when I'm going to speak specifically of cinematography here, when I feel it's too crisp, too perfect. And there have been times where I've turned things off beyond just the story, just I can't handle that because there's something, it does something to my nervous system. I haven't quite figured out what that is, but I can't really, it's like unsettling in a certain way. So I'm really inspired by the 90s in the quality. Even I was watching the Biggie doc on Netflix recently, and just looking at the quality of the style. There's something about that time, or if you're watching VHS tapes from back then, I'm just really inspired by that. That there's this sense of grittiness that still feels contemporary in a way. So that's how I feel. Inspiration.
Yeah, I think I love the 90s. I mean, I'm a 90s kid too, but I think I draw from so many things now, you know. I think when I when I was exposed to the Criterion Collection in college, it sort of changed. And even before that, when I moved to New York and realized how serious independent film was for people there, and the you know the variety of things that you could sort of do and get into, that kind of changed my entire perspective on you know what film could be. And I think like for instance, Fellini's La Dolce Vita, I could watch over and over. It's a film that, like, you know, you don't really need to explain it. I don't, you know, like there's a general plot, but the film itself feels like a lived experience. It just feels like you're immersed into this thing that you can't pick apart, you know? And the kind of things that you sort of, in a sense, that just move into this spiritual realm. And you know, the kinds of you know, films that you aspire to share with folks, because it's in your own way, right? In your own way, communicating in your way. And I remember, you know, one of the first screenings I'd ever gone to was for a film called Holy Motors by French director Leo Carax. And I remember Leo came to the screening, and this like trench coat, hat, he looked like he looked like one of those like old detectives from, you know, from those film noir movies, right? You know, just like he's like concealing himself completely. And they'd asked him to just say a few words before the film, and he was like, you know, hey, I'm Leo, this is my movie. If you like it, great. If you don't like it, I don't really care. You know, and enjoy the film. And then I watched the film, and it was just like there was just so much shit happening, right? There were just so many things that just that play with the senses. They play on a completely different sensual realm that you sometimes miss in American film and TV today. You know, because like you said, everything is so narratively focused and so structured that you almost forget about humanity and the people who are actually sort of engaging in this work, right? Like there is no sort of conversation necessarily happening. Whereas, you know, with certain films that I view from say non-American filmmakers, there's a completely different sort of engagement with those films. And part of it could just be the language barrier and having to sort of view it differently, right? Like you can't just listen to the words, you have to actually take in everything. And so I think I'm constantly inspired by what's happening around the world. You know? Yes. And it looks like we got another question.
Oh yeah.
From Ariana, who says, as a Black film director, how do you balance trying to stay true to yourself as a director, but navigating the industry as it relates to telling Black stories? And this is something we talk about.
Yeah, you know, when you are so secure in who you are, I'm gonna just be very clear. This does not, and hey Ariana, shout outs to you for the question. I don't feel like this is relevant to me because I'm at this stage in my life where it's not even a factor. I'm just being so much of who I am, and I'm so comfortable with that. And if someone isn't aligned with that, it's okay. We go our different ways. You go that way, I go this way. If you love it, let's come together, let's talk. And I don't feel anything about that. I don't feel any judgment about that. I don't feel my feelings aren't hurt over that. It's just I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do, and it's hard for me to even try to force myself to be something to get people to like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm kind of done with that phase of my life, because there was a time, like I had mentioned a bit ago, over explaining. I'm not interested in that anymore. That doesn't feel true to me. You know, back to the authenticity part of this conversation. I just don't feel like it's worth it. It's not worth our energy. You know, when it's time for me to transition out of this life, you know, God willing, I'm an older woman. When I reflect back, I'm going to reflect back about all the things I've done. I'm not going to be concerned about who said no to me, who was not interested in me, because I wanted to be true to myself as a human being. I'm not going to be interested in thinking about those people. Therefore, I'm not going to be thinking about those people currently, because it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? What matters is that you're being yourself, and someone is going to appreciate that. And you have to trust that someone is going to appreciate you doing what you do. And so that's how I feel about that.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add. I mean, it always comes back to what matters most at this point, you know. That's just what it is. I think, and I also appreciate the fact that we can publicly have conversations like this, because it helps other people who may be considering making films feel more comfortable, hopefully, and the choices that they make, and sort of how they approach filmmaking. Because, you know, having gone to the schools, you know, having done all these things, right, you kind of see, you know, how far people will bend themselves to fit in, and it never works. It never really works, you know. And
Never satisfied.
I just don't have the time for it anymore, you know. So I think I mean, there are always constantly things to learn, putting yourself in situations you've never been in. But I think that kind of curiosity is a bit different than, you know, what you might call, you know, compromise, or the things that you feel you have to do to be accepted in this form, you know, which really doesn't have any rules, you know. But that's a longer conversation.
Completely.
And that's also why you need community too,
Yeah.
on some level, you know, to sort of hold you up in that.
And real quick on that, I'm thinking, why would you want to be accepted by people? Let me run that back. If you are going to try to appease a certain group of people because you know they're only going to accept you if you perform a certain way, why would you want to be accepted by someone who only can see you, or only can support you or resource you in your work by being something you're not? So I think ultimately you have to pull back and look from that vantage. I don't want to be aligned with people who I feel I have to show up in a completely different persona. That doesn't seem like, because that's gonna catch up to you, and then you're gonna be miserable, and then it's the breakdowns happen. We see it. We see that play out. We see that play out with celebrities. You see it all the time. People just break down because they've been spending their whole lives trying to appease people, do what they think people want them to do, and the next thing you know, everything implodes. And rather, I would just taking my time. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. I'm going to take my time going through this journey, and you're going to catch people along the way, and you're going to catch who you're supposed to catch when you are constantly in union with what is true for you. And I believe that wholeheartedly.
Yeah, and pay your bills too.
Hey,
you know, I mean, we understand. And then what do we have here?
I think these next two we can probably merge.
Yeah, it looks like Will paying homage to the elders and ancestors in the African diaspora be a theme in your future filmmaking? That seems to be the question here. From Hermione. Yeah.
Think about that.
Yep, that's a question.
That's a big question, because the African diaspora is massive, because we could be talking about South America.
Yeah.
We could be talking about so many things.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I mean, I think the way I see it is I'm constantly in conversation with people who are all over the world now, and sort of learning from them as they sort of unearth the things that interest them, or explore the things that interest them in their communities, in the places that raised them. And we're beginning to kind of see where the overlap is, and seeing ways in which we can support each other. I think that for me, in order for me to stay sane, is probably the best approach, because there's already so much that I have to or want to understand and communicate and sort of dig into, from just my lived experience and the lived experience of the people that are closest to me, that I'm most intimately connected to, that are affected by the choices I make. So so it's going to be embedded in my work either way, and I think this conversation is kind of sort of taken on different forms for people as there's been more and more conversation about what makes a Black film, right? And whether or not Black characters are even in it, so on and so forth. I think for me, the approach that you take to making your work, and sort of your interest in what it is that you're focused on, and the people that you are speaking to at any given moment. I mean, I think that you're going to be embedded in that if you're really working from your intuition, if you're really working from the spirit. Like you shouldn't have to prove that this is a certain kind of thing. It just should not even matter. But I understand it in the political sense, and even in the sake of studio pictures, in the box office sense. I get why it happens. I get why those conversations sort of take that route where they become about a particular sub version of yourselves that doesn't really incorporate the whole of you, and sort of all of the things that are really driving you. But I mean, I think for me it really just comes down to just whatever it is that I feel like I'm really seeing and feeling, just trying to honor that and really focus on that. And getting advice from folks that I trust, and getting guidance from folks that I trust, who tend to be other filmmakers, who tend to be elders, who tend to be, people who've been around a little bit, and so, I mean, all of that plays, it's going to be there in some way.
I feel you. And just my last thought on those questions. I love learning about things through observation, and also through using my hands. And so there was a time, and I still feel this way, that I want to spend in India for a good amount of time learning how to cook proper Indian food, depending on what region that may be. And so thinking about this question, if ever I were to work with anyone, let's say I wanted to go to Ghana and work with filmmakers there, I before I would even pick up a camera or whatever, I would go there, and there would be a specific trade or something specific I would want to learn, because I think there's something so important about understanding people beyond, let me know your story, tell me where you're from. There's something about being with people, or using your hands, that you just become so immersed within that community in such a different way. And of course you want to be called to it, right? So for me, I feel if to step out of these borders, I need to be called.
Yeah.
beyond just, I want to go to Ghana just because, like, on a spiritual level, I need to be called there, right? So, and then when I'm called there, I need to know specifically, what am I supposed to be doing here? How am I supposed to be with these people? What are we doing together? I'm not just here to extract, and I'm very, very, very sensitive towards that. Possibly overly sensitive. I'm even that way when I'm home and doing things. I'm very sensitive to being extractive and exploitive. And so I would need time. I would need to be able to have the resources to take my time. Like, I need to go slowly in here. I need to go alone. And then I can start building a team, and we can start going in together. But it would have to be something very specific, whether I'm staying with someone's grandma or if I'm learning language. That's my feelings. And whether that is from the African diaspora, or like I was mentioning, I have this call to go to India to learn how to cook, or wherever it may be, even if I'm going to Greenland or whatever. I feel it's so important to go in a very sensitive way and being open, right? And you're going to be open to be challenged, because that is also going to happen. And even as a dancer, I've had experiences studying in other countries with people from different places who have such a different approach to dancing. And they have their own feelings about Americans and the way we dance. And they sure as heck let us know when we're over there. And so it's so fascinating. Like, that experience for me studying abroad as a dancer really changed my dancing in a profound way. And even in something you wouldn't even consider, but how there is a westernization to the way I move. And that's not bad or good. It's just, know that you are in this particular paradigm of how you move based on so many factors that you may not be considering. And so at that time in my early 20s, I had to really deconstruct that. Like, ooh, how is like the historical element or the socioeconomic element of this country impacting even the way I move in the world? Like, that is wild. And so that really changed me. And that was probably the most profound experience, studying with people from different parts of the world, that really showed me that the way you move it could have imperialistic implications, and breaking that down and not even be conscious of that, and then becoming conscious, changed my worldview. And so I feel similarly with filmmaking. It breaks down your consciousness in a way to let you open up like a petal, to be able to receive more and to be more receptive, and not stuck in this very codified way of thinking about how things are supposed to be created. And so I'm really, if you have the opportunity and you feel called to ever study outside of the walls of America, it is just such a life-changing experience.
Oh yeah, I've got plenty of places to go.
Oh yeah.
Just to be there, not necessarily to, but just to be present. I think
I think this
we're
is
being
it,
called
guys.
to wrap up here.
Yeah, we're wrapping this up, but I would like to say thank you both for a very interesting, insightful conversation. And I do, please go travel. It's such a great education. I've been to Africa 6 times. I lived in Italy for a couple of years. So as you were talking about those films and and cooking in India. Yeah, let me know when you do that, Callie. Callie, I noticed that somebody put your entire government name in this chat. Callie, what's that? Callie May Nichole Lyons.
I'm totally fine with it. Don't worry.
So I would like to thank you guys for doing this, taking the time to do this. And let's clap it up, snap it up, whatever you do for our panelists. Thank you guys for doing this. And I've been a joy for me to be a part of this. So, and I'm looking forward to your future works, man. Keep doing it, guys. Keep doing it. Keep knocking it out of the park, and telling stories that speak to you, and making films that you care about. That's what this is all about. And thanks for mentoring, because I consider this a mentoring masterclass you guys just did.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate being
here. We learn from your mentor too,
We're learning
like
from each other.
We're learning from everybody.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.